do encourage you to grab a glass or two of your favorite festive tipple as the evening moves forward, or perhaps as the evening staggers forward. What I can offer you, however, is a brilliant keynote speaker for our Q&A in part one. Sorry, just a technical difficulty there. What I can offer you is a brilliant keynote speaker for our Q&A in part one, and a very light-hearted quiz in part two, with an outstanding lineup of shadow cabinet ministers and front benchers, each of whom will join one of the quiz teams. I'm Hamish Sanderson, Chair of Labour Business, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome so many of our own members, so many members of our co-sponsor, Social Enterprise UK, so many friends from the wider business community. We are holding this party to celebrate the strong links that exist between the Labour Party and the business community, and despite the unfavourable circumstances, or perhaps because of them, to say thank you for the outstanding contribution made by so many businesses to our local communities during the pandemic. For those of you who don't know us, I should explain that Labour Business is the business membership organisation affiliated to the Labour Party. Our members are Labour Party members who own or run or work for or manage businesses of all sectors and sizes up and down the countries. You may remember that Keir Starmer mentioned Harold Wilson in his first Labour conference speech back in September as one of only 3 election-winning Labour leaders since 1945. Well, in Labour Business, we're immensely proud that it was Harold Wilson in 1972 who founded the group that became Labour Business. Our mission now, as then, is a very simple one: to enable the Labour Party to have a conversation with the business community on the basis that if we don't listen to business, we can't expect business to listen to us. At a time of unprecedented upheaval, we believe that conversation has never been more important than it is today. Without that conversation, Labour can't road test our business policies, we can't establish our economic credibility, and to put it quite bluntly, we can't win elections. So to help Labour get from here to there in 2024, we are carrying on with the work that Harold Wilson started in 1972, engaging with businesses, small, medium, and large, in every sector, in every part of the country, through roundtables, forums, and webinars like this, all of them online, sadly. We hope to be together again in person very soon. And on the back of that business engagement work, we are collecting evidence to feed into the party's policy development process, working closely with Keir Starmer and his new leadership team, with MPs and peers, with mayors and councillors, helping to develop evidence-based and deliverable on the ground when Labour wins the next general election. At the heart of our policy development work is the effort to define what Labour means by a good business. As Sir Philip Green celebrates Christmas on his yacht in Monaco, it's pretty easy to define what we mean by a bad business, not so easy to define what we mean by a good business. But we are very fortunate to be helped in that effort by our close relationship with Social Enterprise UK. While not all good businesses are social enterprises, I would suggest that all social enterprises exist to put social well-being at the heart of their businesses, as so many of them have demonstrated by helping their local communities during the pandemic. And that's why we're so pleased to be able to cement our relationship with the social enterprise economy through the generous support that SE UK has given to this event. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Peter Holbrook, the CEO of Social Enterprise UK, to add his words of welcome to mine. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Hamish, and thanks, everybody. It's a real joy to be with you tonight. As you can imagine, what we all need right now is even more screen time. And as we broadcast, we're, of course, competing with the wonderful world of puppies on Channel 5. So your presence is extra specially welcome this evening. Social Enterprise UK represents over 100,000 social businesses operating across the UK economy. And I think that often it's a hidden part of our economy. It's not truly recognised for the part that it does play, or indeed the part that it can potentially play. Social value, doing what's right, doesn't come natural to many businesses. They are constructed, their DNA positions them to a different set of goals. And I think the kind of revolution that we need to see is one that we really embrace and use and point all of our assets and all of our resources to tackling the urgent crises that we currently face. Those urgent crises predate the pandemic and familiar terms like COVID-19, and yet they still exist, even when we get through to even a good return on the recovery of the economy. Things like the growing inequality, things like the concentrations of power, things like the lack of representation of ethnic minorities and women in boardrooms will continue to persist unless we take really ambitious action and try and curate the sort of economy that I think we all want, one that's based on the principles of fairness, a degree of meritocracy, a level playing field. Social businesses just want actually an opportunity to really demonstrate what they can do. Last week, we convened a brilliant group of people together, people like Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, Paul Polman, former Chief Exec of Unilever, and the incredible economist, Kate Raworth. And the one thing that they all agreed on, actually, was that social enterprise, actually building purpose into the DNA of our economy, not just into the businesses themselves, but into the systems and structures that support businesses, is going to be absolutely necessary if we're going to overcome not just the immediate crisis that the pandemic has created, but also to resolve the myriad of other urgent challenges we face. So it's great to be here tonight. We're a great supporter of the Labour Business Group and all of the businesses within it. Not all good businesses have to be social businesses, but all good businesses put social value at their heart and at their core. The problems that we've got to solve are really complex and really difficult. And I'm glad that we've got such a formidable and wise woman here to help fix and navigate us through those tricky challenges and issues. I'm also glad that at this time of night, it doesn't really matter if my glass of Guinness slips into view. We can all tolerate that at this time of the evening. And I'm also delighted to be able to expose my lack of political knowledge amongst a brilliant class of political geeks that are joining us tonight in the political quiz. It's great to be here tonight. It's great to be able to support your efforts, and it's great to continue that relationship with a marvellous Member of Parliament and member of the Shadow Cabinet, and Anneliese Dodds. So Hamish, without further ado, back to you for the star of the show.
Thank you very much, Peter. We're really pleased to have you with us, and we'll be seeing you again during the quiz, which is great. So I want to turn now to introduce our keynote speaker. Doesn't need much introduction, but let me just say that energetically, single-mindedly, indefatigably, that's a hard word to say, it will be hard to say at the end of the evening. I'm not sure I'll be able to say it then. Anneliese has been leading the campaign to bust the myth that the Tories are the party of business and to reposition Labour as indeed the natural party of businesses as well as the party of workers and their trade unions. Sometimes, Anneliese, I feel that job is easier than you'd expect, as when Boris Johnson let slip his attitude to business in a four-letter word beginning with F. And that was kind of our easiest week at Labour Business. At other times, we know that we have a mountain to climb. But to be honest, there's no one I'd rather have leading us on that climb than the Labour MP for Oxford East, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Anneliese Dodds. So Anneliese, thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to ask you one question to kick off and let you perhaps elaborate on that. And here's my first question. We're meeting in the run-up to Small Business Saturday on December the 5th. So I wonder what your message was to the 5.9 million small businesses in the UK. At least there were 5.9 last year. I doubt that there are 5.9 this year, who have so much to contribute to our economy and face such an existential threat to their survival during the pandemic. Anneliese, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Hamish, and thanks for that really important question. And of course, this Small Business Saturday will be a Small Business Saturday unlike any other We see huge parts of our country, of course, under restrictions, which will make it very difficult indeed for many small businesses to operate in the way that they would usually. And so I think it's particularly important that, you know, we as a party, as the Labour Party, just as you said, Hamish, a party that is naturally a party of business, as of workers, as of charities, as of communities, that we are out there to support our small businesses on this Saturday. Maybe if I can also just say what a pleasure it is for me to be with all of you tonight. I have to say, sadly, unlike Peter, I'm here with a mug of Lemsip, unfortunately, so I hope that won't be too evident throughout the rest of the Q&A. But really, I want to pay tribute to the work of Labour Business and to the many entrepreneurs and business people who are on the call now. Obviously, many of them small business people, and I think there the challenges have been particularly acute. But we have seen over the last few months an incredibly challenging context for business, you know, whether they've been directly closed by government fiat, of course, the first time that has ever happened in the United Kingdom, or whether they've just seen their demand very, very significantly impacted by this crisis. Oh, that's helpful, the bell going off. I do apologise, bad timing there. But I suppose the kind of last minute problem that sometimes occurs in the House of Commons is exactly the kind of last minute thing that many businesses have been adapting to through this crisis, and doing so very often, of course, with a view to helping with the community effort. I think that's been absolutely incredible to see, but also trying to protect their staff as much as they possibly can. And we've seen so much chopping and changing around support. I'm sure we'll get on to talk about that in the Q&A. We've seen, I would argue, a very inadequate response from government to the public health challenges, as well as to the economic challenges. That means we've experienced a double tragedy in the UK, the highest level of excess deaths in Europe, the steepest downturn in the G7, and now the OECD saying that we will experience the slowest recovery in the G7. So a huge amount to be done. And I'm absolutely determined that Labour must be out there to be putting forward those solutions so that small businesses, business as a whole, can come out of this crisis, can actually do that still alive in many cases, because this really is an existential crisis for many businesses, but can then go on to thrive and create those new jobs that we'll be so desperately in need of.
Anneliese, thank you very much for that. We've had so many questions that I do think that it would be good if we could move straight into the Q&A. I'm going to invite everybody who hasn't already submitted a question, and even those who have submitted them in advance, to use the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen to put your questions. I'm going to start with some questions that have come in advance, and I'm going to take 2 or 3 as a group, and I will initially summarize those. If we get time, I'll bring some people forward as panelists, or at least as live questioners, to put their questions directly to you, Anneliese. And I'm going to try and structure the discussion a little bit into groups of questions. So I thought it'd be sensible, makes sense, to start with the impact of COVID and the government's restrictions on the economy, because we've had a lot of questions, as you'd expect, on that. I'd like to take the first one and probably 2 questions together, and they relate to the impact on communities. A particular question here from an EC executive committee member with experience of coastal communities like Thanet, where he lives. You probably know Del Goddard by name, and he wants to know what we're going to do, both in terms of policy development and as the next Labour government, hopefully, to support communities and town centres, but especially those on the coast. So that's one question. I think related to that, that there are going to be questions around the hospitality sector. So we're looking at coastal communities, we're looking at the hospitality sector in all communities, and maybe you'd like to pick those 2 together, Anneliese, because I think one of the points Del has also made is that in the past we've looked at the impact on jobs, which of course is important, but here today we're looking at an impact not just on jobs, but on the livelihood of communities. And so it'd be interesting to get your response to those related questions. Anneliese.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, Hamish, the two are intricately connected because communities are formed of businesses as well as of civil society and families and obviously the public sector as well. So that's what community is made of. And I think far too often that's not actually recognised. What we're seeing happen right now is actually the lifeblood of our communities really under pressure. We're seeing our high streets and our local economic centres really feeling the impact of this COVID crisis very intensely. And of course, there was always going to be an impact of the COVID crisis on our economy, but it's been especially acute in the UK because of the government's approach, I would argue, the fact it's taken too long, very often, to react to circumstances, the fact that it's often not provided the targeted support that was necessary, the fact there's been mixed messages and it hasn't got a grip on the public health situation. First of all, in relation specifically to coastal communities, and of course we find in these areas as well as in many rural areas. I was undertaking a call with people in the Highlands and Islands over the weekend. You know, very often these kinds of communities are heavily dependent on tourism and hospitality. And actually, until the crisis, those sectors were often growing and often praised by the Conservative ministers in charge as growth sectors for the UK economy. We've seen a very different approach, I would argue, since then, one which sometimes has veered into even suggesting that those sectors would not be viable in the long run. It's absolute nonsense. I think what we've got to do are two things. First of all, in the short term, we've got to make sure that businesses in those communities are actually able to get through this public health crisis, that they are able to survive. And, you know, talking about Thanet, obviously all of Kent now is under tier 3 restrictions. I'm very happy to go into the detail of what Labour is calling for in relation to that if it would be useful, but essentially to boil it down, we feel that business support has got to reflect the level of restrictions and it's got to reflect business need. We don't feel that it does that currently at all. We feel what was announced today is simply inadequate. It will not be supporting employment and keeping businesses going. And it's very, very frustrating from that point of view. So that's what needs to be done in the short term so that we actually keep those businesses going. Of course, in the longer term, we need to have a real genuine engagement with the drivers of regional and local inequalities. We've not had that. We've had, you know, major projects being announced, photo calls, and then the delivery so often lagging years behind after those announcements had been made. That's just not good enough at a time when those factors that really impact on people's quality of life, you know, whether we're talking about people's average wages, we're talking about the availability of further education or of childcare. In many cases, that has been getting worse in our communities, including in places like Thanet. And really, we need to aim for a situation where every part of our country is a great place to grow up in and to grow old in. That includes our coastal communities. And then when it comes to hospitality more broadly, I mean, I touched on this a minute ago, but you know, we think government's got to really act to recover jobs. We shouldn't have a situation where there's still uncertainty, far too much uncertainty. You know, why have we still got the threat of an employer contribution to the furlough scheme in January when so many businesses are hanging by a thread? Why have we still got that situation where the needs from different tiers and of different businesses are not being met? You know, unemployment and business failure is incredibly expensive. And all of this has happened while the government has wasted and mismanaged billions on the public health response. We all know what's gone on with contracting. A different approach is possible to this, one which can get us through that crisis and make sure we have those foundations for a strong recovery.
Thanks, Anneliese. We're talking broadly about hospitality, and it would be remiss of me if I didn't bring in our pubs expert, Dr. Liz Hind, who runs a pub in Aylesbury and has been campaigning on challenges facing pubs. I'm going to ask if she can be brought forward to the panel so that she can put a question to you directly, Anneliese. So we'll try and do that if the technology allows. And any moment, Liz will appear. If not, I'll put her question for her, but I hope she can be promoted to the panel. And then we'll go on to ask some more questions all around the COVID impact and the government's response to it. We'll stick with that for a little bit longer because it's generated so many questions. Liz Hind, are you able to join us? I'm hoping that's possible. Yes, we have Liz. So welcome to Liz Hind, chair of our Women in Business policy group. Liz, would you like to put your point to Anneliese now?
Yes, so I mean, I've spent all afternoon, updating my tills with the substantial meals while listening to the debate and, all sides of that debate. And I mean, I understand what the position that Labour took on abstaining for that, even though it's actually quite a difficult thing for obviously for me to sit through that. And the 1K, I still don't know whether I get it because they're saying it's wet lead, but then it seems that it's wet only, so that needs clearing up. But I think what I'd really like to press on you is that there's still an awful lot that the Labour Party can do to help us support community pubs. So I was listening to you talking at Small Business Saturday yesterday about, why small community pubs have been closing down, and that's actually due to problems within the market. So, will you help us to challenge the beer tie? Because the pubs code legislation is under review now. We've got basically until Christmas to sort that out. And it's a really urgent thing that could really secure my future running this pub post, COVID. And there's also issues that aren't being talked about by Bays and the letters I've seen from Paul Scully about dilapidations. Dilapidations is a massive issue for us. It's something that could cost me thousands of pounds if I have to leave. So, I mean, my question is, I've spoken to as many Labour MPs as I can, get the ear of, and that's quite a long list of them now. Can we please have a meeting about this so that we can talk about, what the Labour Party can be doing at the moment to save, proper community pubs like mine, which are largely tied pubs, independent pubs, left adrift to argue about our rent bills and so on.
Thanks very much, Liz. And related to that, I've got a question from Christopher Hart about access to finance for small businesses, which of course has a much wider application, but I think it relates to Liz's question as well. So perhaps you'd like to take those two together, Anneliese.
Yeah, of course. And first of all, I'd really want to pay tribute to Liz for her leadership, actually, because I think that she's really been speaking out for the sector. And I've been very concerned about the situation for community pubs. I've done a number of different virtual visits. In fact, I was virtually, as it were, in Darlington at the end of last week with a pub there where they'd gone to an absolutely enormous amount of work, as so many have. Obviously, they're in a tier 3 area now, so that they could be ready to provide takeaways. And then you have the kind of announcement that we saw today, which leads those kinds of businesses thinking, oh, hang on a minute, have we done the wrong thing by adapting, to the best of our knowledge to the circumstances that we thought were going to be applying? Just shifting the goalposts all the time is causing enormous headaches for pubs, as for many, many others. I would say that the problems you highlight about the market are ones that I've been concerned about for a very, very long time. This has been rumbling on for many years, and every year we have seen closures of community pubs because of those structural issues. It is an area where I need to work with the Shadow Bays team, but we are aware of those problems and very concerned about them, and appreciate that they're urgent. Be very, very happy to pick up on this offline, of course. I think particularly in a context where the stress and strain on publicans and licensees right now is very, very intense, where we have an increasingly hostile planning system as well, which makes it very, very difficult for people often to resist pressure around residential development if they have a commercial use. That's not the way that you build mixed communities and mixed economies with those community pubs as the hub, which is what they so often are. So yeah, very happy to pick up with you offline, Liz, and make sure that we talk about an action plan around that and around dilapidations as well, and what we can do together on that. And then Christopher's question about finance. I mean, I think that's a really, really big question, actually. I mean, there were major problems with the initial loan packages, which we pushed very, very hard on. Eventually, we got that bounce back loan system being put into practice. But actually, what we're seeing now is that a lot of lenders are becoming very, very risk averse. They're very concerned about lending, particularly to smaller businesses. That's a big problem when we need businesses to be able to invest right now. We're also, of course, seeing a situation where a large number of businesses have become very indebted, and we've been saying to government they've got to engage with groups like the City UK, which have set out sensible proposals around recapitalisation, around how you could deal with that overhanging debt. We've not seen the engagement necessary around that. We would really, well, we have been pushing government very, very hard to get a shift on and actually engage around that. So much more I could say about access to finance, but I'm aware that we're pressed on time, but happy to come back to it, Hamish, if useful.
Great, thanks Anneliese for that. And thank you, Liz, for your question and comments. I'm sure that discussion will continue, and I hope it will in the future. I want to turn to a related point about gaps in the current financial package offered by the government. We've got what sounds like a technical question, but it has a huge impact. And this is from Philip Ross, who's the chair of our small business policy group and a member of the Labour Business Executive. It's about the Directors' Income Support Scheme, identifying the lack of parity between those who have been supported through government schemes who are not eligible because they receive payment as directors or shareholders. And that's produced a huge exclusion zone for that category. And I know we think about directors of companies as people like the man in Monaco, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about small businesses who have structured themselves as limited companies. So he asked whether you've had a chance to look at that proposed scheme and whether you have any thoughts or comments on it. So I'll ask you to take that one on its own, if I may, because it's quite specific.
Yes, of course, and many thanks to Philip for raising it. It's incredibly important, and we've found the last few months extremely frustrating from this point of view. We've obviously had a number of iterations of the furlough scheme, but now also, of course, the self-employed income support scheme. Now, with the furlough scheme, they did change the date for qualification, but actually for the self-employed income support scheme, there's been no change to the criteria used for that scheme. Of course, change to the level of support people receive, but no change to the qualifying criteria. We think that's an incredible lost opportunity. Government's had many months to sort this out. It's had proposals just like that, which was mentioned by Philip around directors' income support. We've been setting out to government other ways that they could deal with this. Also, we've had a whole range of excuses given why action can't be taken. A real kind of computer says no mentality from our point of view, when actually there are ways of getting around this. You know, time and time again, both in relation to this group, but others as well, it's been suggested that there could be a major risk from fraud. Well, in that case, we said, well, put up the penalties for fraud, you know, have more effective systems to detect fraud, but don't penalise huge numbers of people as a result of this. And I suppose just the final thing that I would say around this, and you know, it's one reason why we've repeatedly raised this with the Chancellor, why indeed Bridget Phillipson, my deputy, raised it today again in Treasury Questions. One thing that we're particularly concerned about is that, just as you said, Hamish, these people very often, they're not the real kind of, I don't know, money bags kind of image that is provided by the Chancellor. They're very often people who, for example, work in construction, very, very common form of operation in construction. And actually they're being cut out of support that others in very, very similar circumstances have been able to access. So we do believe that that needs to change. It's just not good enough that we haven't had any engagement with those constructive proposals that have been put forward.
Thank you, Liz. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that from Philip as you go forward. I'd like to start to expand the debate now to look at both the gaps more broadly in current government economic policy and what Labour would do in the future, because we want to look forward as well as back in this conversation. I've got a really nice, very broad, open question from James Sheward, who says, what was missed out of the government's comprehensive spending review, and is there any realistic hope for achieving it? So we'll use that as a starting point for a whole series of questions about what we would do differently and what the future of Labour's economic policy, or its economic vision at least, if not detailed policy, is going to look like. So would you just give us your take on the government's most recent spending review?
Yes, of course, and thanks very much, Jane, for asking about that. I mean, we would say that there was a lot missed out of that review. First of all, I would argue that there wasn't any indication during that review that there would be a clampdown on the kind of waste and mismanagement that we've seen recently. Instead, we saw actually what we've called 3 hammer blows to people's personal finances. We saw the public sector pay freeze, which is actually going to impact on many people who earn less than £24,000. That's actually very bad for our high streets and small businesses, because those people obviously use local economies just like everyone else. They're married to people who work in the private sector. This kind of divide and rule approach is really not what we need when we're in the middle of a crisis of economic confidence. We also saw a hidden bombshell of council tax, the assumption there would be £1 billion of additional council tax paid. And of course, we haven't seen that universal credit cut ruled out either. So we saw those 3 hits to confidence. We didn't see then on the other side strong measures to increase economic confidence and rebuild business that's so necessary right now. In particular, we would argue that the ambitions of governments when it comes to supporting job creation are incredibly low compared to other countries. And I really want to thank those on the call, because I know there are a number who helped us with our Green Economic Recovery consultation, submitted their views to that. We found as a result of that consultation that actually bringing forward capital investment over 18 months, £38 billion of it, would have helped to support 400,000 additional jobs right across the country, you know, in areas from retrofitting to nature management, really supporting the private sector and what they can achieve there, ensuring that we had additional private investment brought in because of public investment, de-risking some of that. What have we seen from government? Well, actually a commitment to support the creation of around half the number of jobs as what Labour wants to see. So that would be, I guess, the kind of core difference that we would have wanted, much more ambition for our country. And rather than the kind of, I would say, very kind of showy, I guess, approach to regional inequality, which suggested that's just down to announcing different projects. We both want those projects to be delivered, to make sure they use local firms, that they upskill local people, to end the situation where we have the announcement of projects like Northern Powerhouse Rail, and then many, many years before they're even approved, let alone ground is broken. But then we also want to see action on those real determinants of people's quality of life up and down the country. Living standards, wage levels, childcare accessibility, educational accessibility, particularly further education. We need to deal with those issues as well. So hopefully that's it in a nutshell, Hamish.
Thank you very much, Anneliese. Related to that, something that's concerned a lot of people with all of the loans being made, which I suppose in some senses we would have welcomed if they helped businesses to get through the pandemic, has also created a problem of indebtedness. And I have a question here from Alec Lever, who wants to know about the second reading of the Financial Services Bill coming up on Thursday, which is pretty much in your area. So I thought I'd put this to you tonight. and he's concerned that it appears to be the Treasury that's going to pay for increased advice resource for debt repayment plans, rather than the financial services industry. In other words, the taxpayers being required to pay for this, rather than the financial services industry itself. So he wonders what your approach to that is going to be, and how you're going to address that on Thursday. So can I put that question to you, Anneliese?
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Alec, for raising that. I mean, that there is a contribution from many firms overall to advice. I mean, we could obviously argue around whether it's at the right level, but there is that contribution there. Now, there is a new kind of product, debt restructuring product, which has been developed by Step Change, the debt management charity. Now, it's my understanding that they've done that kind of in collaboration with government. And that, I think, probably is necessary, actually, for a lot of individuals who are carrying personal debt. I do think that more structured approach, including advice, will be necessary. And I think, actually, there's a huge amount of pressure on those advice services right now. We've seen a real stripping away of that advice from local communities. You know, the kind of welfare rights and debt advice centres that used to operate locally now simply are not present in many communities after a whole decade of cuts to local authority budgets in particular. In terms of this specific question of whether the provisions of the finance bill impact on this, I will need to scurry away and look into that in more detail with my amazing shadow ministers who've been on that committee, Abena, Pat, and of course our fantastic whips and backbenchers. I know this general issue around debt advice is one that we're very concerned about, but exactly where the bill falls and whether that's changed by the committee's deliberations, etc., is something that I'll need to take up after this call.
Good. Well, I think James Murray is on the quiz, so maybe Alec would like to speak to him then about that. I'm sure he's very much involved in that issue. So, as I said, I think it's useful if we can now look ahead at Labour's vision for the kind of economy we want to see in our policies, recognising we're not at the detailed policy stage. So I've got a load of questions around that. I do have to warn you, Anneliese, that we've got some questions about Brexit. So I want to take a bit of time on that as well, but I don't want Brexit to dominate this discussion. So let's just start with some broader questions about future policy for a Labour government. So the first one is from Keith MacDonald, and it's about whether Labour is likely to propose, by way of an economic investment and restructuring programme, how is that programme going to be developed, and what will it look like in broad terms? And relating to that, I've got a question from my colleague Phil Macaulay, whom you'll all see in the quiz a little bit later, if you stay for the quiz. His question is it time for a future Labour government to create our own small business administration, much like the one in the United States? And then some questions around the contribution that social enterprises can make to future growth of the economy, and what role you would see for a Labour government in supporting that sector. Particularly, there's a question about social enterprises in housing and homeless and vulnerable household provision, and whether we would favour allowing access to Home England's grant funding, particularly the Move On Fund. That may be more detailed than you feel able to answer, so that's fine. But in general, if you could address the contribution to be made by social enterprise. So if you could take those 3 points together, I think that'd be really great.
Absolutely. And I would say, first of all, that I'm really grateful to the role that Labour business has played in policy development for the Labour Party for many years. And I hope that can continue. I mean, in relation to these specific questions, first of all, Keith, certainly around investment and restructuring as well, we've already set out a number of proposals. I mean, some of those were in the context of the Green Economic Recovery report that I referred to previously. We stated, for example, that government really needed to get off the fence and introduce a green investment bank. Now, since then, of course, the government has said that it will be introducing a national infrastructure bank. We're yet to see the details of that. Of course, we did used to have a green investment bank, which was then privatised under Conservative ministers. So we're pleased that at last we will be seeing that investment bank that we think is necessary. Obviously, we've already seen moves in that direction in Scotland and support in Wales as well. So we need that to be occurring. We think it's very, very important. We need to see other measures put in place as well to really ensure that investors have the confidence that's necessary. I do think actually Brexit is relevant there, particularly the nature of the deal that we might secure, and you said that we come on to that later, Hamish. But I think it's also about, for example, setting out as stable as possible a regulatory context in those areas where we really need to see investment, whether we're talking about the just transition, the shift to new forms of energy and so forth. You know, in the UK, we've been talking about CCS and hydrogen for decades, and yet we haven't seen that delivery. We need to have far more clarity there. Also about the planning system, I would argue, and making sure the tools are available so that we really can speedily introduce that circular economy that we really need to see. Phil, around small business administration, this is something that Labour has been looking at for a long time, as you know, and I know, Phil, you've been thinking about it for a long time as well. We haven't seen the kind of action that we need to see around issues like procurement, for example, around issues like payments for subcontractors, and the various bodies that are meant to be dealing with that just have not got strong enough teeth. So certainly this is an area that we're very, very interested in and thinking about how we can beef up those protections for small business. I think it's critically important. And then Liz's question about social enterprise. I really want to thank Social Enterprise UK for all of their support, the fact that they've been really willing to ensure that I hear from social enterprise. It's the first visit that I did immediately after my non-conference speech. So my Labour Connected speech was to a social enterprise, and thanks to Social Enterprise UK for organising that. I think it's really important, I mean, I suppose related to what Peter was talking about, that we don't forget the role of social enterprise. It's a huge part of business actually within the UK. Very often the first type of business to move into communities when they've been subject to really extreme economic deprivation, and very often some of the most resilient businesses, obviously along with cooperatives as well. Very important indeed. And when it comes to services for people who have been homeless and rough sleeping, I think there's so many examples of very, very innovative practice out there that I would really want to pay tribute to, which are making such a difference to both their service users, but also the communities that they operate in, and doing so while ensuring that they do fund themselves through the profits that they make, that they do good with those profits. So I think a big loud cheer for all of them from me.
Thanks, Anneliese. A couple of related questions from another Labour Business Executive Committee member, Callum Anderson, and he's given them a bit of a political edge, as you will see. He's interested in climate change, which you've touched on, and his specific question is, how do we build a sustainable consensus within the Green New Deal activists community, within the membership of the party, with the trade union movement, and the business community and general public? So what's your view of how we build that consensus on what everyone agrees is a vital and imperative requirement, that we tackle climate change, but how do you build that coalition? And not unrelated to that, I guess, is his question about levelling up, and how the Tories exploited that in the last election as an election promise. And how do we distinguish our approach to levelling up from the Tory approach? Have they stolen our thunder? So perhaps you could take both of Callum's questions together, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And many thanks, Callum. They're incredibly important questions, I think. First of all, I think it's really important that we have those conversations around the Green New Deal or the Green Industrial Revolution, green economic recovery, you know, however we want to describe it. I think it's really important that we have open conversations, that we are open with each other around the challenges and around how we can ensure that the green economic recovery is credible and jobs rich, and that across every community people can envisage either themselves or indeed their children working in some of those green jobs that we all want to see. I think far too often there is a big gap actually between, you know, those people who are committed environmentalists. You know, I would probably class myself as one of those, you know, who really feel that we need to make that transition as quickly as possible. And of course, many other people who are already under severe economic stress and where there's been potentially industrial dislocation in their area previously, and that hasn't led to a just transition. That's just led to unemployment and economic devastation for their communities. We only need to look at the former pit villages to see that. So we need to have those engaged conversations. And I think that the green economy consultation helped with that. You know, we had up to just under, I think, 2,000 responses from right across the Labour Party, trade unions, NGOs and others, but we need to redouble that. And I would say that's particularly important in the run up to the COP conference next year. Related to regional inequalities, I mean, I think absolutely critical to this is having a very, very strong focus on delivery, because far too often from Conservative ministers, we've had grand announcements and then we've had literally no delivery or extremely poor or delayed delivery, or delivery which hasn't resulted in additional local jobs and upskilling and improvements in local quality of life. You know, I kind of talk a lot about some of those core examples. You think about, for example, Northern Powerhouse Rail. That was actually announced by George Osborne 6 years on, and it's still not even been approved. And in fact, just last week, we heard that the extension through to Leeds, that could actually be delayed by 20 years. Now, this is not the kind of delivery that we need to see. And we've not seen conditions being imposed to, as I said before, use local businesses, deliver local jobs, upskill local apprentices and so forth. So I think, you know, we as Labour need to show that we're on people's side around this, that we want to make sure that investment A is delivered, but B results in improvements in people's quality of life. And we need all of your help, I think, right across the country to ensure that we can do that.
Thank you, Anneliese. I'm going to turn now to Brexit, as promised. A lot of questions on that, but they're all around the concern expressed by one of our long-standing members, a councillor in Bedford, James Valentine, about the plans to vote for a Brexit deal rather than abstain, and many people wanting an assurance that it will be an abstention rather than voting for, and that we see what's in the deal before we make up our minds. So I guess I can pull all of those questions together as a single question. What are we going to do when the Brexit bill, if there is a Brexit bill with an agreement attached to it, comes to the House? Perhaps you could address all of those questions as one question.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, James, for raising this. And just as you said, Hamish, we haven't seen that deal yet. We haven't seen it, and we've got 30 days and a few hours left until the end of the transition period. Until we've seen that deal, we can't determine what our position will be in relation to voting in any direction on it. I've been very clear that actually this government, I mean, of course, we've seen over the last weekend a really, really worrying wobble around whether they would even achieve a deal. But I've been very clear that what government seems to be aiming towards now is a thin as gruel deal. It's not the deal that they promised us previously. You look at areas like financial services, for example, and you know, I've raised this repeatedly. We've gone from a situation where we were promised initially very, very smooth trade, so-called passporting, right down to not even being able to achieve equivalence for our financial products on a reciprocal basis. That is an enormous failure by this government. And in fact, just today, I'm sure people have got better things to do with their time, but just today I've raised this with the Chancellor, the fact that he is on record for having said that his government's Brexit deal would be one that would, for example, reduce costs for working families. And he said that there would be an analysis provided and modelling of the impact. And I said to him, well, look, with what appears to be a very thin as gruel deal, if you even obtain a deal, can you, hand on heart, say you can deliver what was promised before? And surprise, surprise, he couldn't answer that question, which with just 30 days to go, as I said, is very, very far away from where we need to be as a country.
Are you saying, Anneliese, if I could just press you on this, that we won't decide how to vote until we've seen the deal?
Well, that's correct. That's what we have determined, and it would not make sense to determine the position until we've seen that deal. Obviously, I'm really hoping that a deal will be delivered in the first place. And as mentioned, I'm concerned that we could end up with an extremely thin deal, one which won't do what the Conservatives promised it would do. Okay,
let's put the final question to you. Somebody with a lot of sympathy, apparently, for your job as a shadow Labour Chancellor. And he says, this is Callum Anderson again for you. Being a Labour shadow Chancellor is one of the most difficult jobs in politics, he says. How will you and your team go about trying to build trust among business and the general public? Trust that Labour can be trusted with the public purse. So I guess it's the question about economic competence that and credibility that we all worry about, because that's still a lagging indicator in the polls. So we have every confidence in you, absolutely, but we'd like to hear how you propose to go about this and how we can help.
Well, I think that issue is absolutely fundamental for us as Labour members, because we want to make sure that we deliver that change for our communities, and that will involve using public money wisely. And so I think it's really important that we are absolutely crystal clear about our determination to have a focus on, eliminating waste and mismanagement. It's very, very important to me personally that we do that we have that focus on making sure that we support our local economies, and above all, that we deliver the recovery that's so necessary. I don't think that's alien to Labour, actually. And in fact, right up and down the country, I think we're demonstrating that real kind of laser-like focus on using public funds to deliver that transformation. We're showing that in Labour-run Wales, I think, very effectively, where there's been very targeted approach to business support, one which has been very effective indeed. We're showing that in our local authorities. Our metro mayors are showing it. So we need to demonstrate, I think, nationally, that we have that approach as well. And I think that's actually part of being a Labour member and someone who has Labour values rather than something separate to us, because we understand the value of that money. We're never going to take it for granted. And so many of the people in our communities can't afford to take it for granted. And I think that's where there's the difference.
Thank you, Anneliese. Unfortunately, we're going to have to close the Q&A now so that people can move on to the quiz, which starts in about 5 minutes' time. If you haven't already registered for the quiz, you can do so now by clicking on the link in the chat box. I won't try and summarize or sum up the Q&A, Anneliese, but I do hope that everyone will agree that we've succeeded in the goal that we set for ourselves at the outset, which is to celebrate the outstanding contribution made by so many businesses to our local communities during the pandemic, which you've identified, Anneliese, but also identifying ways in which this government has failed and ways in which a future Labour government will succeed in providing the support that's needed to build back better after the pandemic. I also hope that everyone will join Labour Business in supporting Small Business Saturday throughout the week. We'll be working with Labour MPs and constituency Labour parties through our network of business liaison officers to ensure that local business people know that we are listening to them and that we are on their side. And if you want to get more involved in that business engagement, policy development work that's on the back of it, I hope you'll consider joining Labour Business. You can join via our website. The link is on the chat. So it only remains for me, on behalf of everybody on this call, to thank Anneliese for being such a brilliant keynote speaker, and hoping that your cold gets better very soon. Thank you, Anneliese.
Thanks very much indeed. Really good to be with you all. Thank you. Take care now.
Bye, 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 everyone.